in my personal opinion, it's because this confused and angry, spoilt brat can never admit he was wrong.
Hi, all. Welcome to Kinsey Schofield Unfiltered. Joining us today is Jonathan Goldberg KC, one of the UK's most highly regarded criminal defense attorneys. Jonathan, welcome. I know the audience is so familiar with you and happy to hear your reaction to this developing story. You gave us the heads up. You said be patient because this will take a few weeks, if not months. 400 plus pages later. Were you surprised when you heard the verdict?
Well, I was delighted, Kinsey, but I'm not sure I was surprised so much.
Yeah, I mean, because you said that there were many different directions that this could go into, and maybe we'll talk about, the statute of limitations throughout this process too, because the judge makes mention of that. But can you break down the case for us, in UK law for dummies for the American audience? Is the judge really saying, I found the Daily Mail's witnesses more credible than the evidence that was presented to me in this case?
Yes, he definitely is saying that very clearly. But let's start, shall we, with the basis of it all. If you bring a claim for civil damages, as Harry and his six co-claimants did, and you claim that you've been civilly wronged, his privacy and their privacy had been abused by unlawful information gathering, UIG for short, done by these newspapers owned by Associated News, the defendants. Well, you've got to prove it. Indeed, if you bring any kind of civil case, if I bring a case against you for breach of contract, I've got to prove it. And in civil law, and this is identical in Britain as in America, in civil law, the standard of proof is on the balance of probabilities. In other words, that it's more likely than not that the defendant did the naughty things that the claimant alleges. That's different from a criminal case before a jury or a magistrate, whereas, if you bring a criminal case, then the state or the king has to prove it beyond reasonable doubt so that the jury is sure. So in other words, there's a lesser hurdle for a civil plaintiff than there is in a criminal case. Now, the judge here, after a 46-day trial, an enormously long trial for a judge-only trial, and after the most painstaking judgment, which I predicted, didn't I? I said this man was extremely good and extremely careful. And 436 pages later, and every detail gone into at extraordinary length and with extraordinary care in the most intellectual way you can imagine. I've read it, and I just want to say to your listeners, it's not a sexy read. It's not like reading a novel. I'm afraid it's actually really quite dull. It's like reading, I don't know, a laundry list at enormous length because it's just, written to be factual and understated and careful, all this sort of thing. But he absolutely demolishes the case that was brought by Harry and the other six. And he says, you've simply not proved it. You've simply not brought evidence to satisfy the burden on you of making me think it's more likely than not that this unlawful evidence gathering happened. Now, en route, he says a number of things about the various witnesses, as you would expect. And again, he never exaggerates. It's all typical British understatement and stiff upper lip. And he never uses two words where one will do. So he does say that he's not finding Harry to be a liar, or indeed any of the others. He is saying that they got carried away with passion for their own cases. And whilst they no doubt believed they had been wrong, that doesn't substitute for evidence that they're correct in that belief. He could have, been nastier to Harry. He let Harry go quite lightly in that he didn't find that he was an exaggerator and a blowhard, which
It's
I'm afraid
okay. We think he is.
we think he is. You and I both, and millions of others probably, particularly in Britain. But he does say there were 40 journalists of different degrees of seniority and fame, from the unknown to the very well known, called by the newspaper group. And he said in every case, he found their evidence credible, honest, genuine, trustworthy. All these sort of adjectives were used in relation to the 40 journalists. And they were all saying, if you had to boil it down into a sentence, that they were all saying, we did not gain the information on which we based our articles unlawfully. His friends were blabbing, unknown to him. They couldn't wait to talk to us. We used publicly available records to check different things. We used other people's stories that had been published
And
without
Harry
complaint.
was messaging us on Facebook.
That was going on as well, and texts to the likes of this young lady, Charlotte Griffiths, and so on. So the judge, having heard all this, said, I believe them. He said, but I don't even have to go so far as to say I believe them, though I did. He says, all I have to say is that Harry and the six have not discharged the burden that's fundamentally on them in every case to bring evidence to show me that beyond, that it's more likely than not that unlawful information gathering was taking place, and they haven't discharged that burden. It was as simple as that, really.
Jonathan, what was your response when you saw Prince Harry describe this judgment as a complete and obvious whitewash? From a legal perspective, how extraordinary is it to characterize a high court judgment in those terms after such a full, excruciatingly, thorough trial?
Well, it's really outrageous. And the first thing that you have to say is this, that it took me hours and hours and indeed days to read this judgment carefully, because it's 436 closely written pages that, as I say, are in no way a sexy read. You could go to sleep in the middle of it sometimes. Now, Harry issued that outrageous statement. He and Doreen Lawrence, Lady Lawrence, they were the only two of the seven who said this. Wise, the others were wiser, I think. But he issued that within about 20 minutes of the result being known. So you've got to realize that there's no way he could have read it before making that outrageous comment. However, you ask, are there consequences? Well, actually not, because in the great democracies in which we live, both in America and in England, you can criticize a court's judgment. You can say it's wrong. I don't agree with it. It's exaggerated. It's stupid. You can say all these things. What you can't do, and Harry, whose statement was obviously written by the lawyers, not by him anyway, he was just fronting it, I would suggest. But he didn't say the judge took a bribe. The judge was biased. The judge was a director of Associated Newspapers. If he'd made those kind of allegations, he could have been done for contempt of court. But he went about as far as you possibly could, I would say, without being in danger of proceedings for contempt of court. And he said that it was an outrageous and obvious whitewash. And he said that the judge went to extraordinary lengths to exonerate the newspaper, and he even gave this nasty sort of insult. He said, nor was it even unexpected. But all this is sheer sour grapes, Kinsey.
I mean, would you advise, because you said that this seemed to be written by his attorneys, would you advise your client to go on the attack like that? What's the ultimate objective there? Is it, public perception?
As Paul Dacre, the sort of head of the Daily Mail and the chief editor, and actually a very fine man, because he's a man with a tremendous record of lending his main newspaper, which is the Daily Mail, a very important newspaper. I think it sells more copies than any other in England, actually. and he lends it to good causes. So one example was the very murder of Lady Lawrence's son, who was he was a black boy murdered by a gang of white racists. And if it hadn't been for the mail, they'd never have been found and sent to prison. Another one is my own case of Marine A that I think was quite well known, the case of the Royal Marine who mercy killed a Taliban, and they charged him with murder, and we eventually got him off after a long process on appeal. And again, without the Daily Mail having fronted those campaigns and indeed paid all the costs, these miscarriages of justice would never have been righted. So, as Paul Dacre said, Harry is a confused and angry young man. And this Lady Lawrence has been used because she's a kind of national treasure in England. She's been taken for a fool by Harry, and he's fronted with her, to give it some credibility. So when you say to me, what was the purpose of this statement criticizing the judge? In my personal opinion, it's because this confused and angry, spoilt brat can never admit he was wrong, can never admit that he's, done a terrible thing in bringing this entire losing case and wasting perhaps £50 million in legal costs, as the bill is thought to be at the end of the day, all of which could have gone to one of his charities that he's always going on about. They could have used the money more usefully, I'm sure. So it's just utter sour grapes, and he is a spoilt brat, and he can't take no for an answer because he's been brought up, as a princeling who's never had to. This is my own take on it, but obviously your opinion is as good as mine.
Yeah, I think that he was humiliated a little bit more, considering the fact that this was supposed to be his big return, his redemption tour in the UK, and then to arrive and immediately face this rejection. I think that that's what, yes, to your response, he's a brat. But I also think that the increased embarrassment of being home and watching, it interrupting something that he had planned, this big reunion with his father, and he wanted to look like Saint Prince Harry, doing all these charity events while he was in the UK. It's like we're constantly watching this man have a meltdown, a public meltdown. He, never thinks about the consequences of his actions. But, he has said repeatedly, he's like positioned himself as someone fighting to reform the media, talks about how he's slaying dragons. Does a judgment like this risk undermining the credibility of that broader campaign? Because he has won some, but wouldn't you rather go out on top versus, a real kick to the gut like this loss was?
Well, he's won some, and he's like a gambler in a casino,
Yeah.
who wins the first couple of hands of poker and doesn't know when to stop and ends up, losing his trousers. And that's what has happened here. And for sure, this is the end of his campaign to clean up the press and make us all live in a better world, and slay all these dragons. That for sure, it's the end of it, because I mean, his credibility is completely gone in any English court now. No insurance company would think of insuring any future case. And just people are laughing at him now. He couldn't possibly bring another case, even if there were one to bring. No, this was the big one. This was the one where he was going to finally slay the dragon. And of course, he was so lucky because a number of his earlier cases settled. The newspaper groups, different newspaper groups, were scared to take him on because the costs were so enormous, and the risks were so great. So it was altogether cheaper and easier to give him a quick apology, pay him a lesser amount, and let everybody go home. And that's what happened. And I've no doubt that these other newspaper groups who lost to him previously or settled with him previously, I'll bet they're kicking themselves that they didn't stand and fight the way Paul Dacre did and associated newspapers did. And good for them. It took considerable courage. And of course, the well-sourced rumor is, and this has appeared in a number of press articles, that Harry was desperate to try and settle this case for a very small amount of damages, but just to be able to say he won again, that he was, banging on doors and sending intermediaries prior to trial. But again, the newspaper group bravely said, no, we're going to stand and fight this so-called dragon slayer. let's see if he's got a sword at all. And of course he didn't. They called his bluff. And good for them.
You're right. I specifically remember last week reading in the Telegraph that Harry had tried to settle. So you think in trying to settle, did his lawyers recognize that they had, a difficult fight on their hands, or was it just because they wanted to check another box and be able to say, look, we won, or even I'm sure they consider settling, winning their case. Was he trying to go out on top in attempting to settle before this started, or do you think that they saw weakness in their strategy? And then I'll go into the insurance question with you.
Yes, I'm sure they did. And I'll tell you what the weakness was. And insufficient attention has been paid to this and in the various press articles I've read about it. And indeed, dare I say, in your own excellent broadcasts from London, which I've been watching with great joy, where you've been interviewing different important people. And this point has not really gone home. But if you read the judgment, and few have, because as I say, it's not the greatest read that you can think of doing, but I have. And you see, what went wrong was this, that Harry and his lawyers and his backers, and he was backed absolutely to the hilt by something called the Hacked Off campaign, which was a campaigning lobby group with some fairly sinister figures. It was bankrolled by, he died quite recently, but Max Mosley, who was the billionaire's son. He was a billionaire from Formula One racing. And he was the billionaire son of Sir Oswald Mosley, who famously was the fascist black shirt leader in the 30s in Britain, who wanted Britain to join in the Second World War on Hitler's side. Tremendous anti-Semite, really a Nazi, the British Nazi.
He married one of those sisters that are yeah.
The father married one of the Mitford sisters.
The Mitford sisters, yeah.
And Hitler came to the wedding and drank champagne with them. And, they were all, that's what they were. And in the war, Churchill interned them. They were in a prison cell throughout the war.
I cannot believe that Harry, who's writing in the New Statesman about anti-Semitism, is buddy with these people.
That's whose shilling he was taking, as we say.
Oh my God.
So this hacked off group had a number of shady characters. Another one was a former Liberal MP called Dr. Evan Hughes, and he was a witness at the trial. And Dr. Evan Hughes somehow recruited I'm going to call him what the judge basically calls him, a bent journalist called Graham Johnson, who was one of the guys years ago sent to prison for UIG, for hacking phones and this sort of stuff, for unlawful, and he was sent to prison for it. But the moment he came out, he was recruited by Harry and his team. And he recruited in turn a bent private investigator called Gavin Burrows. And Burrows gave them a witness statement that they thought was pure gold, because Burrows said that the Mail, Associated Newspapers, the defendants here, that they paid me to bug and to burgle and to steal and to do all these terrible things against all these famous 7 people, and you, Harry, that you're alleging. And I did it and they paid me. And so that was to be their witness. Do you follow? But that all collapsed a few weeks before the trial, because for whatever reason, this ghastly fellow Burrows now turns round and says, everything I have said previously in my witness statement is untrue. It's a pack of lies. And not only is it untrue, it's not my statement. The solicitor wrote it for me, and I didn't even sign it. My
Oh.
signature's been forged. So, against that background, and this happened just a couple of weeks before the trial was due to start, so their star witness has collapsed. You can understand why they're desperately scrambling around saying, give us 10 pounds and we'll settle.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Exactly.
that's not been, it's all in the judgment, but nobody has sort of picked this up, strangely enough.
Well, when you read the judgment and the judge even talks about some of the articles or and you mentioned this in a previous podcast, some of the stories that should not have been presented because of the statute of limitations.
Yes,
You
quite
know,
right.
couldn't the insurance company sit back and say that the attorney should have known better to present this, and because the attorneys went ahead and presented this and the judge has acknowledged that he recognizes that it should have never come across his desk, couldn't the insurance company say, we're not going to pay out what we agreed to?
Well, I think it's possible, and I think they may. We won't hear about it, unfortunately, unless
Really?
somebody leaks, because this sort of thing is always a closely guarded secret, and it doesn't come out in court what the insurance company has or has not done, or how much they're insured for. Nobody reliably knows. But let's assume that they have insurance. It won't be for the full amount of the costs that I think is likely to be awarded against them. There's a hearing on the 29th of this month, and the judge is going to decide costs. And the big headline to watch for is whether the judge awards what's called indemnity costs against Harry and against any or all the others. And indemnity costs means that I'm not just going to award you the costs that, well, let me start at the beginning.
Yeah, yeah.
What normally happens is that the loser pays the winner's costs. It's called the English rule, totally different to what happens in America, where anyone in litigation normally has to pay their own costs, with very rare exceptions. But in England, the loser invariably has to pick up his legal costs and the legal costs of the winner. So that can be an enormous sum. And in this case, it's been estimated to be £50 million. Can you believe this? Right. Now, normally the court says, yes, the loser has to pay, but only reasonable fair costs, not inflated costs, not what the finest lawyer in the country charges, but what a reasonable lawyer would have charged. They go through the bill item by item, and normally it works out to be about 50%, 60% of what has actually been paid out. But if the judge says, because you've behaved badly, and there were a number of respects where the judge has said in that very understated English way, but it's very clear nonetheless, your solicitor, a girl who certified that she'd taken the statement of this Graham Burrows and asked him all the right questions and only written down his answers. Turns out she wasn't there at all. She delegated the taking of the statement to this crook, Graham Johnson, to do. He wasn't even a lawyer. So the judge says that was improper, right? You've got the situation where this Dr. Evan Harris, the former MP, he was inventing stories for two of the claimants, Sir Simon Hughes and Sadie Frost, the actress and formerly the girlfriend of Jude Law, as you know. Anyway, in order to get round the 6-year limitation period, which would have defeated their cases, even if the judge had found, which he didn't, but even if he had found that the journalists had used UIG, a story was invented by this Evan Harris, and he was stupid enough to put it in an email, that they should say that they only learned of the fact they had a case to bring from a website that hadn't published this until 2019 within the 6 years. So a fake story was invented by him to justify their being late in bringing their claim. So a lot of dirty things have gone on and have been exposed, you see. And if the judge says, I'm not putting up with this, I'm going to order indemnity costs as a mark of my disapproval and displeasure. And I think that's quite likely. And by God, I'm hoping it happens, as are many millions of other people, and certainly every lawyer who's read that judgment. If he says so, this is the thing to look out for. Perhaps you'll be inviting me on again if we hear that indemnity costs have been awarded. Well, then, my God, not only will it be far more, almost certainly, than they're insured for, so it'll hit their own pockets, including the great princeling. It'll hit their own pockets very hard, but also it's such a badge of shame, if indemnity costs are awarded against you, it means you've misbehaved and you've abused the court's process. That's what it means, reading between the lines.
And then, so if that does come to fruition, do we expect that the 7 claimants would split those costs? And if so,
Yeah.
are we then, I mean, I'm more concerned about the woman who lost her son, the woman whose son was murdered, when it comes to those million. I mean, Harry is broke, but
Yeah.
there's another Honda Civic conference he can go speak at in Canada, Toronto. I don't know. But I worry for someone like her that got roped up into this and doesn't have the Elton John lifestyle and bank account.
Well, I didn't answer your earlier question. I'm reminding myself. You said, could the insurance company avoid the policy
Yeah.
because they've behaved improperly? Answer is possibly. I don't know because I haven't seen the actual policy, and none of us are ever likely to. But it would certainly enable them to say, you've behaved improperly. Clause 3, you have to behave absolutely above board and honestly, and your lawyers and your witnesses and all the rest of it have not done. That could happen. But even if it doesn't happen, I guarantee you that the insurance only kicks in for a percentage of what these costs will be, maybe 50%, who knows. There'll still be a very big shortfall that the claimants will have to pay for themselves. And the normal rule is that where you've got 7 claimants, they're jointly and severally liable, which means if 3 go bankrupt, the other 4 have to meet up the loss, have to pay the bill. Or if 6 go bankrupt, the final one has. That's the way joint and several liability works. So, the chances are that his nibs, his worshipful highness, the princeling, is going to be in for some big bucks here. I don't know whether you're right when you say he's broke. I've got my doubts about that. I think we'd all like to be as broke. That's the broke. We'd all like to be broke. But the chances are that each one of them is going to have a hefty bill. And, I don't even feel so. Maybe Doreen Lawrence negotiated that somebody else would pay her bill if it went wrong. If probably her lawyers will have done that because, as you say, she's not got big bucks. But I think the others are going to be in for a hefty bill if
And
the judge
is Hacked Off helping pay for some of this too?
Well, again, that's shady and behind the scenes, very likely. Very likely that there's some sort of deal whereby Hacked Off and Mosley's millions are paying for it behind the scenes. But this is stuff we don't know. We can guess, we can speculate. We'll probably never know. But let's put it this way, that when you analyze what's gone on here carefully, Paul Dacre's absolutely justified in saying this is a most momentous win. There was a conspiracy, he says, make no mistake, to shut down a newspaper, namely mine, the Daily Mail, and dirty deeds were done. I think he's right.
I agree.
As a royal reporter, I'm always digging into international stories, but nothing's more frustrating than hitting that content block online. That's where ExpressVPN comes in, a virtual private network that creates a secure tunnel for your online activity, keeping it private and safe. For unblocking, it lets you change your online location to any of 105 countries. I use it to access UK and global libraries. No more missing out. Privacy-wise, it hides my browsing from ISPs who sell data, crucial when researching sensitive topics, and on public Wi-Fi during travel. Its encryption protects my logins. ExpressVPN's the best, fastest speeds, no log servers audited by PwC. Plan starts at just $3.49 a month. That's like 12 cents a day. It's unreal. Find out how you can get up to 4 extra months by clicking the link in the description box below. expressvpn.com/Kinsey. That's expressvpn.com/Kinsey.
Based on Harry's reaction, the whitewash press release, does that give you the sense that he's not going to appeal this? Or does common sense tell you appealing this would be ludicrous?
Appealing it would be ludicrous. He hasn't got a leg to stand on. I'll tell you why not. Because the appeal courts always say that the greatest respect has to be given to the judge who heard the witnesses. We don't hear the witnesses, say the appeal judges. We only read it on paper. And that's never the same when you're trying to decide who's telling the truth and who's swinging the lead. To read it on paper is never the same as watching the demeanor and watching how they react in court and how they react to cross-examination and, the body language, the sweating, the, all the things that you look at when you're trying to decide is somebody telling you the truth or not. So the appeal judges will always say, we weren't there, the judge was, we have no basis on which to overrule him on findings of fact. And 90% of what the judge has found is findings of fact. Mm-hmm. And the 10%, which is very crucial, is a simple proposition of law that he who brings the case must prove it, and they didn't. So I can't see there being the slightest chance of a successful appeal. And if I know it, then David Sherborne knows it and will be telling Harry this unwelcome news.
You mentioned David. Can you talk to me about, because I remember when we were covering this a few months ago, we were tickled a little bit over the fact that the judge kept having to remind Prince Harry who was in charge. The judge kept having to kind of reprimand in a kind way Prince Harry while Prince Harry was on the stand. What's the dynamic between the judge and David, Harry's attorney?
Well, it's very interesting, actually. So what do you know? David Sherborne, who is this, careful choosing my words, flashy, very flamboyant, very showman-like, beautifully, immaculately dressed. His hair must cost a fortune every day. Not a hair is out of place. He's gleaming. He's sleek. He looks like a Rolls Royce always. And I've no doubt his prices are to match. Okay, so David Sherborne was in the same chambers, in other words, group of barristers who share rooms and who share administrative staff. They're not allowed to share profits, by the way. Barristers are unique and really very old-fashioned in that way. You can't have a partnership of barristers that share profits. It's not allowed. So each barrister is individually, he makes or he doesn't, or he loses on his own, okay? Now, with that in mind, he was in the same group of barristers, the same rooms, as we call them, chambers, as the judge. The judge was appointed a judge a few years ago, and so obviously he then left. But for years, these two, if they weren't sharing a room, they were sharing cups of tea. If they weren't sharing cups of tea, it's a group, a group of maybe 30 barristers of all seniorities. And you grow up with them. And I can tell you from personal experience, some you like and some you don't. Like anything else in life, you don't tell tales outside the chambers because that would hurt all of you. But some you love, some you can't stand. Now, the difference in personality between Sherborne, you only need to look at the photos of them, and Mr. Justice Nicklin, who's so, British and understated and crumpets and tea and has the village clock struck 3. He's a sort of quintessential English gentleman. I think he will have loathed Sherborne when they were in chambers, and I doubt Sherborne was too friendly with him. So it's very interesting that of all the judges in the world, they land this one when this high-profile case comes to trial. The KC on the other side, Anthony White, just like the judge, understated, quiet, non-flashy, non-flamboyant. So I think, when I say to you that I'm sure the lawyers will have drafted Harry's statement, and when you get this, nor was it even unexpected, this whitewash, this way in which the newspaper was exonerated, I think that you have to read between the lines of what I suspect Sherborne was drafting there. There was probably years of animosity coming out.
Yeah. What do you think when you hear somebody like Tom Bauer who says that Sherborne, was conveniently at a party that Prince Harry was invited to at Elton John's house. And, he says that Prince Harry's kind of like roped into this scheme that Elton John's been plotting for years to take on the newspapers, and Harry is like the perfect lamb to the slaughter. Harry's got a chip on his shoulder about the media, and Harry's going to bring the attention that they need, and maybe, some of the money that they'd need to go after these big entities.
And of course, there's more than Harry behind it, because hacked off Hugh Grant, the actor, is deeply involved with hacked off and was one of the original founders and front people for it. Hugh Grant, who was his girlfriend. I don't know if she was his wife, but Elizabeth Hurley, who was one of the claimants, and one reads that they're on.
Well, she was his girlfriend when he picked up the prostitute. We remember that much.
Yes, I do. Now you remind me. So, there's wheels within wheels here, and people are involved behind the scenes, and nobody's better than Tom Bauer at uncovering this sort of thing with his investigations. And if he says it, I've got no reason to doubt it.
Yeah. What would be, what would be the strategy behind that? Like, would it be Elton John getting together with somebody like Sherborne and being like, here's what we need. We need five big personalities to help take down the Daily Mail?
Of course, I'm totally speculating.
Yeah, this is hypothetical.
But you've got these 7 celebrities, all of them celebrities to a different degree, some of them absolutely A-list celebrities. And what do you know? They all have this desire to slay dragons of the newspapers. And what do you know? There's hacked off behind them, and there's Max Mosley's millions and billions behind them. Oh, so it goes on. The hypocrisy of the whole thing, the pretentiousness, the posturing of Harry, who's doing this for the betterment of the world. It's so utterly sickening, and yet we see it every day with these kind of people, don't we?
Yeah, and I mean, never complain, never explain is the royals' motto.
She must be not turning in her grave, our late great queen, but spinning in. She must be spinning together with the Duke of Edinburgh. They must be doing a jive together. In horror. A
jive at St. George's Chapel.
Yes, if they are able to see what's gone on here, because it's so alien to the way they led their life. And you quote the famous advice of Queen Elizabeth: never complain, never explain. And it stood her in good stead. But of course, this spoilt kid is completely the opposite. Any chance you get, show your bleeding heart, show your victimhood, show how badly you've been treated. And then, of course, that ghastly Meghan, who's been careful not to go in front of the camera on this. Did you notice you didn't see her for dust while any of it was going on? Who knows what she actually thinks of it and advised him? She may not have been as supportive as we're all assuming, Kinsey.
Well, maybe last year, there's a publication that they really like here in the States called People Magazine, and they brief them a lot, like the most of any other publication. Yeah. And she had one of her friends tell people that she was sick of the litigation and wanted to focus on the future. So I do believe that she doesn't want Harry to continue to pursue this type of thing, that she wants to just stop suing people and try to do whatever it is they're trying to do. But I did notice that whenever Harry is in trouble, Meghan Markle tends to disappear.
Yes. Interesting.
That's not the partner you want by your side. So speaking of, Harry potentially continuing this litigation, I guess. Looking ahead, what does this judgment mean for him? Does it make future privacy claims against newspaper groups more difficult? Will other attorneys hesitate to take something like this on? Because this was a great example of Harry trying to litigate feelings versus actual evidence. Will people hesitate to work with him in the future if he tries to continue to pursue things like this?
Well, this is my guess. I think we've seen the last of Prince Harry's litigation. I think he's come down with such a bang this time. He's fallen on his face. He's been humiliated. It will also hit him hard in the pocket, for certain. I don't think he's going to bring any more cases against newspapers, and nobody's going to take his cases if he wanted to. No insurer. He'll always find a lawyer because that's not hard. Lawyers love publicity, and he'll always find a lawyer. May not be Mr. Sherborne, but there'll be somebody. Any good lawyer in any case is going to say to the client, look, your feelings don't cut any ice. We've got to have the evidence. And if we don't have the evidence, we're not taking this to court. Any good lawyer does that. I've done it 1,000 times, obviously, in my career. Whether Sherborne did it on this case and Harry didn't listen, we'll never know. It's quite possible, It's quite possible that Harry, being the kind of arrogant, entitled person we all see him as, that he didn't listen to the advice he had. Quite possible. But in any event, because he's been brought down with such a bang on this occasion, I think his litigation days are over. Now, you asked me, will it stop other people suing newspapers? Every case is different. Every case depends on its own exact facts. So now if somebody else has a good case against a newspaper and a competent lawyer says to them, this is a good case, you've got the evidence, it should work. And just one point again, if this fellow Gavin Burrows, this bent private detective, had not at the last minute said this is a pack of lies and I'm not going through with it, and he gave his evidence eventually by video link from the Philippines, apparently. He's obviously scared stiff to even come back to Britain. God knows what can happen to him if he does, because there's going to be a lot of people who are not best pleased with him and perhaps think he wasn't valued for money. So if that hadn't collapsed, and if you'd had a credible witness who stood up there and said, the defendants paid me to bug Prince Harry and the others, Harry would have won this case,
Mm-hmm.
So, you have to realize this was a close call.
That's wild to imagine that it's just one witness that they lost. And they
would have been the evidence if the judge had believed, if he'd stood up and if the judge had believed him, instead of which the judge said he was evasive, lying. If he shook hands with him, you'd have to count your fingers afterwards. The judge said that in as many words about Mr. Burrows from the Philippines.
That's hilarious.
But I'm simply saying to you that when Mr. Sherborne was assessing the likelihood of winning this case, right up to a couple of weeks before trial, he would have taken it as a given that we have a witness here who's going to give direct evidence, not inference, direct evidence that the newspaper paid me to do all the terrible things that Harry claims. Now, that would have been a different case entirely, wouldn't it, had that stood up?
Mm-hmm. Well, will you come back if we get any additional information about, because isn't there another court date where they determine costs of?
Exactly. That's going to be July the 29th and July the 30th.
Okay.
And
will you come back so we can dissect some of those details if we get any details from those days?
We're going to get more than details. And as I said to you, watch out for those words indemnity costs. If they're awarded.
Well, that should be exciting. We'll come back and we'll discuss that. And we might have to set up a GoFundMe for poor Prince Harry after this one. Just kidding. We wouldn't do that.
Yes, you and I will be fronting it, I'm sure.
No. Agree with us, disagree with us, let us know in the comments below. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend. And Jonathan, you'll come back in a couple of days so that we can we'll discuss what's next when it comes to this case. But you predicted all of this right here on Kinsey Schofield Unfiltered. So I guess you're right. No, you weren't surprised. I guess my biggest surprise was Harry's clapback. I just thought it was entirely inappropriate and it made him look like a sore loser.
I agree.
All right, we'll see you again next time. Bye,
Thank you,
guys.
Kinsey. God bless.